Hi, everybody. Today's Tuesday, April 7th, 2026, and our dear friend, our brother, John Helmer, is here with us. Welcome back, John.
Thank you for having me back, Nima.
John, let me start with what has happened with the U.S. operation in Iran, which was supposed to be, they were talking about two other provinces in Iran, Khuzestan and Kohkiluye. Then we saw the operation was in the southern part of another province, which called Isfahan, in the southern part of that. Then we've seen the destruction of airplanes together with fighter jets and Black Hawks, Little Birds, and various of these military equipment were destroyed at the scene. But the operation, the way that Donald Trump was describing it yesterday, was successful. And what is your take? What do you make of what has happened in Iran?
Well, several points from the Moscow end, if you like, which is a little further away, but it's very important, I think, for our audience not to get mesmerized by the military jargon, by the recitals of the names or code names of U.S. airplanes, let alone the code names that were used. Was Dude 44 Alpha, Dude 44 Beta, the kind of code names that were used by General Kane in the press conference yesterday. What's happened at Isfahan should be understood politically in the United States as a very, very serious problem for President Trump. And if you see what's happening as evidence of his political problem and go back into his press conference and see what he said he was doing on Saturday night, Sunday, what you get is a very interesting, I think, insight into Trump's fear. What was happening politically for him, and it may have been the first time in his presidency, either first term or now, that what he thought was to be a winning operation. And bear in mind, the calendar shows he was not having any official meetings Saturday and Sunday. He stayed in Washington. He didn't go to Miami. I've done an analysis on Dances with Bears so people can look at where he was when he was tweeting and where he was when there's no record of where he was. I think we can now say he was in a situation room and was watching very carefully. He reveals he was watching much of the, quotes, action on Saturday night and on Sunday. What he must have understood was the catastrophic losses of the two C-130 transport planes and the destruction of at least two, maybe three, maybe more helicopters, not to mention the loss of another aircraft, the A-10, I believe it was, which was acting in support. So imagine yourself, for our audience, imagine you're in the situation room and you think you are the commander-in-chief of the greatest military machine ever in the history of the world. That's his language. And suddenly you see the possibility of what has been a two-pronged operation. That's the significance of Major Amanda Ryder's papers, that she has allowed to leave behind not only her ID and her Israeli visa, we'll come back to that in a minute, but a packet of operational documents. You can see it in the video, their maps, their orders, their codes. There it is. Those are operational, top secret operational details, names, destinations, orders, the entire story of what that operation was about. Somehow or other, Major Ryder left it behind. Now, in the latest Dances with Bears, for those who want to, she's got a platinum American Express card. That's interesting. I hadn't spotted that before. Not your regular American Express card, but a platinum card. Okay. as a major, you earn about $110,000 a year. What we need to see here is what the evidence she left behind reveals about the nature of the operation. Then we go back into the Situation Room and we put ourselves at the table where Trump is understanding two things. One, there's an operation to attack the nuclear facilities in and around Isfahan, capture nuclear material, and kill everybody around, and then destroy the interiors of whatever storage facilities, bunkers that they come across. That operation, if it was designed, and it's in those papers and that package you just saw, that has totally failed. Second, they're trying to rescue the second crew member who Trump spends a lot of time describing as having dragged his wounded leg up, scaling cliff faces into a cave on a mountainside, and so on and so on and so on. He is reporting what he was seeing on TV. He thought he was in a great adventure show. He talks about it like that. The problem is that suddenly, with the Ryder evidence, we're looking at the possibility that has dawned on everybody in the room, especially Trump, that they're looking at a Jimmy Carter-sized catastrophic failure of a hostage rescue mission. 2 planes, big transports, and several helicopters destroyed. That's even more than Carter lost in May of 1980. Now, Trump remembers, everybody in the United States in politics remembers, that Carter and Brzezinski thought that they would be doing themselves a tremendous political advantage in that election year, May to November, if they were able to pull off a military rescue operation of the US Embassy hostages. Instead, they blew it in a very large way. The mission, you can look it up, folks, in Wikipedia. I won't bore everybody by retelling it, but the political risk to Trump was huge. He couldn't cope with the possibility of another one of those, especially not when you look at the polls. You look at the polls at the moment for Trump, and you see steady increase in disapproval, but it's steady. It's going up like that. More disapproval and approval going down, but slowly, with a 16 to 20% undecided batch of people. If there had been a disaster of that kind at Isfahan, you'd suddenly see all the undecideds joining the disapproval. And suddenly, instead of it being 54%, it'd be 70% or more. So Trump is
it was called, sorry for interrupting you, John, it was called Operation Eagle Claw. And,
That's right. A great bird names, Epic Fury, Eagle Claw. They never name operations, Operation Sparrow. But there you are. That was what happened. But the politics, and that's what I'm emphasizing, go back from the military risk to the politics. Just bear another thing that Trump admitted during the press conference. He was asked, has anybody opposed your operations against Iran? And he admits, yes, there's military opposition. Trump says in the press conference that there were military objections, people in the military objecting to the rescue mission. What he really means is there were military objections to the attack, the mission, the operation to seize the nuclear material. That was an operation the military thought was too risky, too potentially dangerous, too likely to lead to a Carter-like disaster. And it did. And it did. Except that Trump's luck, they recover the second crewman. So what we have in the press conference is a demonstration that Trump inadvertently makes when he makes his thank yous, when he answers press questions, of a significant splitting in the White House and Trump's fear of a major catastrophe. So let me put it another way and sum it up quickly and get back to your questions. When Trump's afraid, when he suffers an episode of fear of losing, he becomes even more violent than he was before. And that's exactly what happened coming out of Sunday. First, he celebrates the capture, 2 tweets, or the recovery of the crewman. Then he gets even tougher, nastier, using swear words again against Iran, the bombing back into the Stone Ages, plural. There you go. There's the swear word. You'll find more swear words from Trump, new ones, in the press conference if you look hard. So politically, what we have here is something I'd like to call the Jewish faction, which is in favor of escalation, and the Christian faction, which is against it. Who are they? Trump thanks Witkoff, Kushner. Why are they involved in a military operation? Why were they in the room? Trump wants them in the room. He relies on them. He relies on Hegseth and Kane, the 2 military types, Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, to take orders. But we already know that the chief of the army staff has been forced to resign. We know from Trump there's military opposition to his adventurism. They don't want to lose people. They don't want a military catastrophe. Trump doesn't listen to them. He's listening to Witkoff, Kushner, and Netanyahu. They want to annihilate. They want genocide against Iran. They have wanted, if necessary, tactical nuclear weapons. Trump thinks, and the military in the United States is against that for all sorts of reasons, good reasons. Trump thinks he can pull off operations, brilliant ones, without resort to nuclear weapons. So he's persuaded the Israelis to join him in this Isfahan operation. We find that Ryder's papers show that she was ordered into Israel March 20. That's when her visa entry begins. She's to be there until June 20, 2026, for 3 months. The planning for her going is at least 1 month earlier. So we now know, in retrospect, from that small amount of evidence, and the Iranian side has much more, that the Trump and Netanyahu were planning this operation before the war started on February the 28th. It's quite a lot of things that one can learn from the catastrophic outcome of those 2 fixed-wing aircraft, 3 helicopters burned up on the ground. So politically, in my opinion, what our audience has to do is put yourself in the room and understand when you're the president of the United States, you're facing not only defeat on the ground, humiliation, political loss of the Carter scope. And what that will mean for Trump is personal. If he loses control of the Congress in November, he faces the likelihood of a coalition to impeach him. He knows that impeachment will lead on to prosecution for himself, for his family, his sons, for the whole group. So he knows what that's like. He's just come out of that after many years, right? So the stakes are personal for Trump on Saturday night, Sunday, personal. Therefore, he projects himself, and he says it, you can see from the words in the press conference, he's projecting his own fate in the movie he's watching of these operations. So I think what we have to do is wait, learn more, and understand that Trump's apparent loss of mouth control, loss of anger management, his increasing escalation of threats relate to his fear on Saturday night, Sunday, and his determination to absolutely crush the source of his fear in Iran now, today, 8 p.m. tonight.
Yeah. Yeah. Here is, John, what Lindsey Graham said about today, 8 p.m.
Any moment. This time tomorrow night, we're going to have one of two scenarios: capitulation of their desire to rain terror on the world through diplomacy, or we're going to have a massive military attack, destroying this regime's capability to ever wage war again.
Yeah, this is the understanding of Lindsey Graham. But what we've learned from the Iranian president tweeted just moments ago, he said over 14 million proud Iranians have up to this moment declared their readiness to sacrifice their lives in defense of Iran, and he's one of them. He registered his name. You know, this is not, for many people who are talking about the war in Iran, it's about everything right now in Iran, John. It's about everything. It's about the future. It's about the history. It's about what Iran is today, what Iran represents today. It's about everything. That's why I don't see anybody, backing down in Iran.
And Lindsey Graham's just made it clear that it's capitulation or destruction. I mean, that was his. He called capitulation a diplomatic solution, but he means capitulation. And the giveaway in the press conference, the psychopathological giveaway that Trump mentions, is that that they've humiliated the Iranians by their rescue mission. This is back to front. In fact, he's afraid of being humiliated. And without too much psychoanalysis of Trump, his niece, Mary Trump, has written a whole book about that. I can hardly bear to read it, but it's there to understand. The man is psychologically very dangerous right now, and we have to be very serious about that. And so the Iranian side, as you've just described, both people and government, have to understand that capitulation or destruction amounts to the same thing.
Yeah. John, when it comes to the situation right now, we know that Donald Trump is somehow coordinating. In my opinion, he's putting himself in a trap by sending these sort of ultimatums to Iranians. That's not going to help him if he really wants to resolve the problem. That's why we've learned from the Iranian part yesterday. They responded to Donald Trump and his administration in a letter by Pakistani. It's 10 points, and they're talking about everything. I think that's the main objective on the part of Iran. It doesn't matter if Donald Trump decides to attack Iran, to continue this war. Iran is prepared, from what I've learned, from what we've seen so far. Iran is prepared to continue this war. But if Donald Trump is serious, he has to seriously think about those points that Iran sent to the United States through, the government of Pakistan.
Well, we can go through the reply involved 10 points. We've talked together last week and then the week before of the, let's call it the evolution of the Iranian position from Mojtaba Khamenei's 5 points to Ambassador Jalali's statement in Moscow, which amounts to 4 points. And now we're back at 10 points because the Americans threw 15 points at them. Basically, I used the word evolution. The Iranian position's been very consistent. It hasn't changed. But the 10 points have some interesting, let's call it angles, which a rational US side might consider. The most interesting, let's just remember for everybody that Mojtaba Khomeini and Ambassador Jalali's statement in Russia involved reparations, removal of the US bases, permanent solutions so that not a ceasefire, so that Iran wouldn't be exposed to another period of Israeli-American planning to attack again, and the preservation of control over the Hormuz Strait, lifting of sanctions, no limits on missile capacity, and a readiness to accept nuclear enrichment levels at civilian levels, not military levels. Those are the main points in the past. The new 10-point reply that came from Islamabad has a couple of extra interesting issues. At the beginning, permanent end to the war, lifting of sanctions, end to regional conflict in which Iran joins the conflict in Gaza and Lebanon to this negotiation. Guarantees of future attack, we've just covered that, you did too. Reconstruction reparations, a Strait of Hormuz protocol, a transit fee proposal. The wrinkles here, I've calculated in a tweet sense this morning. If Iran sets up a toll system, which is the proposal, there are 120, and I'm just give you the arithmetic so people can understand the money, because this is the way the reparations could be paid. There are approximately 120 average vessel transits every day, half of which is oil and gas, half of which is bulker and container ships, box trade. 50,000 a year, roughly, a 2 million toll per vessel adds up to 100 billion. Now, suppose Iran gives itself a free pass, sanctions off, and gives the friendly states and the poor states significant discounts for own cargoes and friendly states. Let's basically say 50 billion discount. And then you take off 50% because Iran's promising to share the Strait toll with Oman. And you come out with approximately $25 billion for Iran's reparations, which in the 10-point answer is committed to restoring and repairing war damage, nothing else. So there's a proposal. It's got arithmetic. It's got numbers. Intelligent, reasonable people could negotiate it. When Trump was asked about this yesterday, you know what he says? He says, to the victor go the spoils. I'll take the tolls, he said. Why should they have them? Now, the man's mentality is absolutely dominated by Kushner, Witkoff, and the other Jewish member of his circle, Stephen Miller. Violence makes victory, makes spoils, makes ours. That's their line. You don't see any sign of the so-called National Security Advisor, Marco Rubio, either in the Situation Room, in the press conference. He's gone. You only see the two military yes men, and we have the opposition. The opposition based on polling, that's Fabrizio in the White House, legal issues, war crimes issues, future immunity issues, and the military risk issues. You just don't see on the US side any shaping up of diplomatic negotiations. There's nobody there. There really isn't. Witkoff and Kushner are not diplomatic negotiators. They're not going to negotiate the toll. So what's left? Answer. Iran is having its effect by the capacity to retaliate with more violence than the US expects and to inflict more damage than the US and its allies, including Israel, can tolerate. The US can tolerate it, Israel can't, Kuwait can't, Bahrain can't, Saudi Arabia, and so on and so on. So it's only by preserving and replying tit for tat, symmetrical and asymmetrical violence, can Iran persuade the non-negotiator in Trump and his faction that the risk that the Christian faction are telling him, the Pentagon, the generals, isn't worth running. Does that answer the question? As far as I can see, there's no negotiation. There's an exchange of papers. And until Trump exhausts his fear and can be persuaded that he's won, we will see continuing escalation. I don't see an alternative to that, no matter how reasonable the Hormuz Strait toll system might turn out to be.
John, my understanding is Donald Trump is trying to destroy everything before leaving, everything, whatever he had achieved behind, and get out of the Middle East. He's trying to do this because as we talk, they're bombing the Khark Island, they're hitting the facilities, the defensive facilities, they're Israelis bombing railways across Iran. And here it was just amazing. People should see in this picture, you see the rabbi, the leader of Iran's Jews, he's visiting the synagogue that was destroyed by Israeli attack. This is significant, I think, after all, because when it comes to the ground invasion, I think the incident yesterday with the raid, if we assume that was a raid, it wasn't a rescue operation. That has totally failed, and Donald Trump knows the extent of, if he decides to go in that direction, that's going to be hugely consequential for his presidency in the United States. Right now, as we talk, Democrats are talking about impeachment of Pete Hegseth. These are huge repercussions of what is happening right now between Iran and the United States.
Well, we can't really talk about impeachment until the Democrats win control of both houses. They can talk as much as they like. They're simply running for office at this stage, and they haven't won it yet. But it is a fear on the Republican side, especially in the polling department, the chief of staff, and so forth, those sections of the White House. But for the Jewish rabbi, the chief rabbi of the Iranian Jewish community, to be looking at the destruction of the synagogue, it's important to understand how religious Trump and his people are in their sense that God is on their side. I mean, I do recommend, if anyone can bear to read the press conference, you will see Trump claims that while he was watching the operation to rescue the weapons officer, the highly respected colonel, Trump calls him, he apparently used his transmitter to transmit to the CIA and then to the Situation Room, God is good. And then Trump goes into a whole riff on how good God is on Trump's side. And there's a sentence or two, won't bother quoting it, in which Trump gets himself confused with God. God's uncomfortable with what's going on, says Trump, talking pretty familiarly because it's Easter. And he says, I'm pretty uncomfortable. The combination of Trump, God, and the particular Chabad version of Jewish religion, which Kushner has, and many other elements of the Netanyahu government in Israel, and Gruenbaum, who's also part of the Kushner-Witkoff negotiating team. These are Chabad ideologists. These are people who think that God is theirs. They and God are holding hands, and everybody else can be, as it were, eliminated because they're evil, a term Trump uses repeatedly. These are religious doctrinal terms. Now, look, not even Hitler, not even Mussolini, we have to use such senses of exceptionalism as a religious doctrine. The state of Israel's founded on such a doctrine. It's now part of the President of the United States, some combination of Christian God, evangelical mission, Armageddon coming up, the Messiah arriving. Trump's got all this running around in his head. And it is a bit of a mistake to view him as purely the stooge of all these people, or the state of Israel, or the Zionist lobby, or the faction fighting. He's not just the stooge. He articulates for them. He chooses between them and the alternatives that are presented to him. He actually has some sense of God-given mission. These are serious problems, which can only, I mean, we can talk about it. We can try to be reasonable about it. We can explain. We can be horrified and resist. The problem is there's only one way of resisting this, and it's not rational talk. It's war. And when the talk is exhausted, only the Iranian capacity to survive, retaliate, survive, and inflict a level of damage that requires negotiation. It seems to me we've reached that terrible point. And it is a terrible point. Well, there's no fun and games about. This isn't a video game. This is, for Trump, a religious video game for him. That's what he went through on Saturday and Sunday. And he thinks he was resurrected.
Exactly. John, when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz and the payment system, I think it's so much problematic for Donald Trump and for people like Lindsey Graham. Here is what Lindsey Graham said about the payment system in the Strait of Hormuz.
Strait of Hormuz. Right now, they're charging ships, the IRGC, the Iranians, to go through the straits, and they're taking the yuan, not the dollar. One threat of this whole debacle is if we start allowing the Chinese currency to be traded in oil, that will hurt the dollar. In 1974, every barrel of oil sold and traded in the world is traded in dollars. Now, what are the Iranians trying to do? They're trying to change the currency from a dollar to a Chinese yuan, and that's an attack on the dollar. And that needs to end, too. So I'm very optimistic that President Trump's going to bring this regime to an end one way or the other. I prefer diplomacy. But this time tomorrow night, they're either going to do a deal that makes sense for the world and the region and for Iran itself.
Repeating John, what is happening? I think the use of petro yuan, or as they call it, an alternative currency, is one of the most important part of this new movement of getting away from because dollar is not going to help Iran, and they were under the sanctions, tremendous sanctions of the United States for more than 46 years. That's why Iran doesn't want to get back to that cycle of using more US dollars, because it's not going to help Iran in a long run. I think, but the tone is, if, let's assume, it's not just about Iran, the whole, global South. I'm talking about Russia, China, Iran, and even India recently bought a new tanker of oil, 600,000 barrels of oil from Iran in rupee, in Indian currency. This is the reality of what's going on right now. I don't know what is going on in the mind of these people that they can somehow force the other countries to use dollar. That's not there anymore. That's not the logic for them anymore.
Well, I can only agree with you. I'm not as optimistic as some are that the US empire, this is a war that will end the US empire. On the contrary, what I see as happening in the United States is the potential for Trump to blow up in a certain way, in overcommitting to wars he will lose, particularly in the Middle East, that Vance will come in as a potential alternative and strengthen the US empire in the Americas. That's the US empire will run from Greenland through to Canada, down through Mexico, and simply dominate the entire Central and Southern America. It will be an American empire anchored in the Americas, led not by Trump, but by Vance. That the sequencing of wars that we've talked about before, that's part of the more rational members of the Pentagon staff doctrine, would mean moving away from this level of violence in the Middle East, moving away from the level of violence on the Ukraine battlefield, concentrating on containing China and rebuilding up a very sort of, let's say, North and South American empire, which would be dominated by the dollar. The US would actually strengthen, control all of the Americas. That's not an end of the US empire. It's not even an end of the dollar. But with the attempts by Russia and India to use rupees and rubles, with the attempts of BRICS to find bilateral and multilateral payment mechanisms outside the dollar system, to avoid the way in which US can use sanctions to track transactions that are based on dollars. All of that's in flux. I'm not confident that in the outcome of this particular war from tonight on, from 8 p.m. on, we're going to see the US empire significantly weakened. It's significantly weakened in that region, no doubt. If they escalate, and our colleagues here, Ted Postel and many others have pointed out, with the retention of the Iranian capacity to retaliate, any escalation against Iran threatens the survival of the state of Israel. Any nuclear attack, and I'm glad Ted Postel spelled it out, it's very grim numbers, but in a nuclear attack that Israel launched against Iran, Iran will survive, but the retaliation will end Israel. It's not me saying it, it's somebody who's looked at this from a nuclear engineering, warfare engineering point of view for a very long time. And it's clearly the stakes. And there are US policymakers in the Trump administration who understand that risk. They don't want to go over that precipice. Trump himself simply doesn't understand the precipice. He's got God for his parachute. He's got a sense of, he's got an 11-year-old's English vocabulary. He's got serious psychopathological problems, and he thinks out of the disaster of the weekend, he wins victory. So this is an individual who actually dominates, not is simply manipulated. And he's going to overstep his capacities. And Vance is waiting there to take advantage. Now, exactly how that will play out, I don't know. It remains to be seen that there's simply nobody left in the US press capable of analyzing the signs anymore. Trump doesn't allow anybody in press conferences to get near him to ask unpleasant questions. The New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal have all discredited themselves. We're the alternative now. I'm not proud of it.
Yeah. I think, John, what the outcome of this war, it was unthinkable before this war happening. What does it mean? It means that, what has happened in the war in Ukraine, you see destruction. I would say after Ukraine, it was the destruction of Germany. It was, look at the German economy, look at the way that the Nord Stream pipeline, then the presence of American forces in Germany. What was the outcome? Right now, Germany, which is suffering from their problem with the Nord Stream, then the repercussions of what's going on in the Middle East. There is some comparison between Germany and what's going on in the Middle East. These Arab states are somehow in the same position as Germany was and has been during the conflict in Ukraine. They're losing a lot. For such a long time, they were paying the United States all these beautiful big bases in their countries. And right now they're getting devastated by that policy. They were, they were paying everything related to these bases, everything. And, somehow you can compare these countries to Germany, but do you think, as we talk, you've mentioned before coming up to this live, you've mentioned Bahrain has a request at the UN, which would be voted today at 11 a.m. Eastern time. And how do you see these Arab states, GCC countries? Because they're losing everything. And they're coming to the solution. In Germany, the head of AfD was talking about the United States should leave Germany. They have to withdraw their troops. These are huge. These are unthinkable consequences of what has happened in Ukraine, together with what's going on right now with the war in the Middle East. Your understanding of that?
Well, let's come to the general part, because that's really important. So remind me if I wander off. Let's just go quickly to what's about to happen. We're at about 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time coming up now. And in 3 hours on the same clock, the UN Security Council will meet again to vote on a much amended Bahraini resolution. That's, as you said, supported by all the Gulf Cooperation Council members. But the dominating one always is Saudi Arabia. So this is a Saudi-American resolution put through Bahrain because it's the nominal chairman of the UN Security Council right now. And what's happened is that this resolution was intended to legalize war in the Gulf against Iran. It was to provide a mandate for all defensive measures necessary. The language keeps changing, but it meant, no doubt about it, a mandate to use force if the Arab states, that's principally Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, would combine with the United States to force the Hormuz Strait open. Now, China, Russia, and France have all indicated, and in negotiations in the corridors and the back rooms of the UN, they've indicated that they will not vote, they will veto potentially any language that creates a legal mandate for force. That's what they've said. Macron has gone somewhat further than the other Europeans you mentioned, certainly further than Germany, and much further than the UK and Italy. Italy is negotiating now with Iran. France, then Macron, who's himself almost as volatile and unpredictable as Trump, was then the target of personal insults from Trump on Macron and his wife. I'm not here ever to defend Macron, but the fact is that in the politics, the narrow pressure cooker politics of the UN Security Council, 3 veto-wielding powers have said no forced resolution. Now, what we don't know, because the exact terms of the resolution are not public until they're voted, we don't know exactly what the language is. What we do know, because Mr. Arakchi, the Iranian foreign minister, and Foreign Minister Lavrov had a telephone call yesterday, and I've just reached for their communique in which they discussed this subject. And I'll just say, paragraph 3, in which the Russian side make it very clear, in agreement with the Iranian side, the ministers, that's Arakchi and Lavrov, called for the avoidance of actions, I'm quoting, including those in the UN Security Council, which could undermine the continued chances of promoting political and diplomatic efforts to resolve the crisis. Well, that's 1 or 2 cheers for the Russian position. It's not clear from Representative Nebenzia or the deputy representative whether they're getting ready to veto. Remember that when they faced an Arab consensus in the UN Security Council in the past, they've abstained. This time, however, it's clear what this is. It's like the UN resolution to authorize force against Libya. At that time, then President Medvedev didn't veto that resolution, the outcome of which was the assassination of Gaddafi and the destruction of Libyan state and all of the troubles of the Libyan civil war that spill out all over Europe, right? So Russia's very clear. It's opposed to any attempt to legalize American force. You said, what do the GCC, what do the Arab sheikdoms think they are doing? Good question. It's not for me to get back into Arab politics, which I left many years ago. You're in a better position to say. But the sheikhs have long lived on wishful thinking. They've long been dominated by the idea that they could use their increasing wealth to buy US protection, saying off camera how much they dislike the Americans, on camera how reliable the American protectorate is. They're duplicitous, yeah? However, the bottom line has been they've relied on an American protectorate, Patriot missile system, THAAD missile systems and radars that have ceased to be deterrent, have been penetrated and destroyed by Iran. So for the first time, the sheikhs are looking not at an enemy that cannot penetrate the US defense, but an enemy that has Now, how can they then think they can mobilize the remnants of US force to force open the Hormuz? It seems unlikely that they have confidence in that. And it's clear that that Egypt, Turkey, a lot of the Muslim states don't support the sheikhs. So this is the last stand of the sheikdoms, the Arab monarchies. I'm reluctant to use the word monarchy because it has a very long history, which these sheikhs and their families do not have. They do not have the legitimacy, pseudo-legitimacy of European monarchies, you might say. They don't even have that. What they've had is the reliance on first the British protection against the Ottomans, then the US protection, and now who's protecting them now? That's a problem they have yet to face. And this resolution, which will come up in a couple of hours' time, will, I think, have no practical effect. The battlefield is being determined by the balance of forces, and the sheikhs are on the defensive. they are defeated in their defenses. The alliance between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan is dead as a doorknob. The alliance that was written in January between the UAE and India, dead as a doorknob. The Houthi threat to close Bab el-Mandab, the gateway to the Red Sea, is the last potential resource Iran has not mobilized yet against the Saudis' effort to use Yanbu port and the diversion from the east to from the west to the east to get half their oil, or about, let's say, a third of their oil out in lieu of what they can't get out through Hormuz. There are lots of fantasies about how they can build alternatives to the Hormuz. Force isn't now an alternative. So whether Russia and China agree to veto, whether they're satisfied that the resolution is so watered down they can vote for it or abstain, we'll know in a couple of hours' time. But the practical outcome, Russia's committed with Iraqchi to say, this doesn't help. And the Russian commitment to help Iran put force and deterrence behind their diplomacy is proving to be modestly effective. So I don't know, it's a long-winded way of saying, I don't know why the Saudis think this helps. Nobody else thinks so. And Trump himself has said, to the victor go the spoils. I'll take the toll of the Hormuz. Trump has said, if the European, we don't need the Hormuz oil. Actually, he's not quite right about that. They take Saudi and Iraqi oil. But he said, it's up to the Europeans to negotiate. Well, the Europeans are not Lindsey Graham's idea. The Europeans are ready to make bilateral agreements and essentially, in principle, will agree to some form of Hormuz Strait toll system, which would give more than a nod to Iranian sovereignty. And in any case, the Iranians are not going to negotiate this ace in their in their hand without significant elimination of sanctions. After all, why should Iran open this Hormuz to the others, all of the others, including the enemies, when the Hormuz Strait has been effectively closed to Iran itself by all the sanctions against Iran? This is a paradox. The only way to solve this paradox is by winning this war, acting with sufficient force to deter any further attacks. And the resolution, I think, will go nowhere.
Yeah. John, you mentioned before the situation with France. What is the situation with the gas, for example, in France? And how is that playing out in the decisions of Emmanuel Macron?
Well, I have a particular personal connection to rural France, and I can tell you right now, and that's what we were saying before we came on air. There's considerable fear that at the closing of petrol stations, essence is now not only expensive, double the price, but it's not available. One has to go to a website. If you're in the French countryside now, and you depend on your car to get around, to get to the doctor, or you have to drive your truck to pick up and move your business, you can't get diesel, you can't get normal petrol products because the station is closed. It has no supply. Also, cooking gas, you know, in remote areas, a cooking gas, container gas is necessary for all sorts of purposes. That's short as well. But Macron isn't introducing an equitable rationing system. He's letting a distorted market draw supplies all over the country in a way that will maximize the vulnerability of the rural population already severely hurt by everything Macron has done. I'm not sure that Macron gives a fig for rural France. And I'm not sure that the political dynamics will put pressure on Macron. What is putting pressure on Macron are the French oligarchies, or business oligarchies around him, and the French military that understand that they might be drawn into a Ukraine battlefield situation, which they don't want. But just by the way, let's remember that the French general staff have been mighty helpful to Israel in Lebanon. Let's not forget that the French behavior opposed to Hezbollah in support of Israel it is largely secret and undocumented, but one can find plenty of evidence for it in the resistance journalism that exists in France. So you have tremendous stress that everybody's feeling. You mentioned Germany. It's getting equally dire in England, wherever you go in Europe. And this is a direct result of the Hormuz. And therefore, governments like Meloni's in Italy are trying to negotiate bilateral special agreements. They'll pay the toll as they look forward to some withdrawal of US force. And once US force is withdrawn, the sheikdoms have got a new problem: how to negotiate with Iran.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, John. Great pleasure, as always.
Thank you, Nima. We've got, as I said, we've got two deadlines to look at: the 11 o'clock one in New York and the 8 p.m. one, when Trump's Bridge Day ultimatum, well, as you've pointed out, they're already bombing the infrastructure, the railways, the power plants, and so forth. So the ultimatum is already been violated by them. They're not holding back. So the only thing we will have to see is what happens after 8 p.m. And we'll also learn in the coming days just what happened to the Isfahan operation and what became of Major Amanda Ryder and all the things she helped us understand about the US military failure at that spot over the weekend. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. My understanding is that Donald Trump gonna declare TACO.
You think that he will back down?
Yeah, because he has no other solution. He has no other option than that. I don't know, because they're already attacking everything in Iran. That doesn't change anything when it comes to the Iranian, the reality on the part of Iranians. They know they want to fight. They want to fight back. And they're prepared for that. That's why I think Donald Trump goes with the option TACO today. Hey, let's see. Yeah.
Let's see. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.